You wouldn't believe it if I told you, but here's the truth. One day, I was minding my own business, enjoying a peaceful morning in my garden when Karen, my HOA neighbor, knocked on my door to tell me that my bird bath was illegal. Yeah, you heard that right. A bird bath. Something so simple, so peaceful. It's been in gardens for centuries. But according to Karen, it didn't meet her standards. She claimed it violated some HOA rule about aesthetic consistency in the neighborhood. You'd think that was enough to make me just pull it out, right? Nope. Instead, I decided to double down in the most satisfying way possible. I didn't just replace the bird bath. I didn't just remove it. Oh no, I installed a Roman-style fountain with water jets, full scale, complete with classical statues, and a fountain that could be heard for miles. And Karen? Well, she wasn't ready for this. Not even close. Let me take you through the ridiculousness of the whole thing. From Karen's overreach to my revenge installation that turned the entire HOA upside down. It all started on a quiet morning when I decided to clean the garden. I had a lovely, modest bird bath right in the center of my front yard, surrounded by flowers and shrubs, perfect for the birds that often stop by. I'd had it for years, and never once did I think it would attract attention beyond the flurry of sparrows and robins who enjoyed splashing in the water. But then, like clockwork, Karen decided it was time for her weekly inspection of the neighborhood. Karen was the HOA president and had nothing better to do with her life than enforce the most ridiculous rules in the book. She was always poking around, trying to find something to complain about. It wasn't a shock when she showed up at my door one Saturday afternoon with her usual scowl. "I need to talk to you about your bird bath," she said, folding her arms like she was about to bring the hammer down. I looked at her, confused. "What about it?" She stared at me, her face a mix of disgust and authority. "It's illegal." I blinked. "Illegal?" "Absolutely," she said, nodding firmly. "You're violating the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. It's not part of the neighborhood's approved design schemes. And it's too old-fashioned. You can't just put whatever you want in your yard." My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My bird bath was illegal now. In a world filled with real problems, the HOA had nothing better to do than complain about a bird bath? "I don't understand," I said. "It's just a bird bath. Birds love it." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she whipped out the HOA rulebook from her oversized purse, flipping through pages dramatically. Section 4.2, subsection B. It clearly states that any outdoor water features must adhere to the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. Your bird bath does not. You'll need to remove it. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. Karen had done it again, found something to ruin in our peaceful neighborhood. I could already feel the stress rising, but I wasn't going to back down. "Karen, I'm not going to remove my bird bath," I said firmly. "If you don't mind, I'll continue to enjoy my garden as it is." Her expression hardened. "You'll hear from me again. The HOA has already been notified, and you'll be fined for violating the guidelines. We'll give you a week to remove it." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked off. Karen had spoken, and as usual, she thought she had won. But this time was different. This time, I had a plan, and it wasn't to just let her walk all over me. The next few days were a blur of planning, measuring, and browsing for the perfect solution. I could have just removed the bird bath, of course, and saved myself the trouble. But that wasn't going to happen. Instead, I decided to make a statement. Karen had taken a simple, innocent garden feature and turned it into a battlefield. I was going to win this war. I spent hours researching Roman fountains, and I found a design that blew me away. A massive Roman-style fountain, complete with stone statues and water jets that would make the grandest palace gardens jealous. I didn't want just any fountain, though. I wanted something that would drown out Karen's voice, something that would make it impossible for her to ignore. I wanted her to know that messing with me over a bird bath was a huge mistake. I hired a contractor to install it, and over the course of several days, my front yard slowly transformed into something you might see in a luxury estate. The sound of water began to fill the air, and I could already feel the anticipation building as Karen's retribution loomed over me. By the time the installation was finished, it was nothing short of spectacular. The Roman-style fountain stood proudly in the center of my yard, with water jets spraying high into the air, surrounded by classical statues and a meticulously manicured garden. It was beautiful, grand, and most importantly, it was completely legal. I stood in my front yard, admiring the work. It was the kind of fountain you'd see in Rome or at a royal palace. But here it was, right in front of Karen's eyes, a true masterpiece that said everything I wanted it to. The next day, Karen was out in the neighborhood, as usual, going around with her clipboard, ticking off boxes, making notes of anything she could complain about. But when she reached my house, her eyes widened. She stopped in front of the fountain and stood there, gaping. I couldn't help but smile as I walked up to her. "Good morning, Karen. I hope you like the new addition. I thought the Birdbath wasn't quite enough for our garden, so I upgraded it." Karen's mouth dropped open. This isn't legal," she sputtered, her eyes darting around the fountain like it was an alien spacecraft. "This is a disruption to the neighborhood's aesthetics. This doesn't belong here." I leaned in casually, watching her struggle for words. "Karen, I don't think you're qualified to judge what belongs in my yard. After all, you just called a simple birdbath illegal." Her face flushed red with anger, and I could see the vein on her forehead twitch. She was furious. This is outrageous. I'm going to take this to the HOA board. You can't just put something like this here." I shrugged, trying to look as nonchalant as possible. "Well, I already checked with the HOA. This doesn't break any rules. I made sure to follow all guidelines, and there's nothing in the books about Roman fountains with water jets." Her anger only grew. "I'll have you fined for this. You're breaking the law again." I smiled, taking a step back. "Go ahead, Karen. You do that. But I don't think the HOA will be too happy when they see how beautiful it is. I'm sure they'll be thrilled. After all, you do say they have such high standards." Karen stood there, fuming, staring at the fountain as if it had personally offended her. But instead of continuing her rant, she simply turned and stomped away, muttering under her breath. As I watched her walk off, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had made my point, and now it was up to Karen to figure out how to complain about something so beautiful and so clearly within the rules. She had tried to ruin my simple pleasure in the garden, and I had turned the tables on her in a way that not only made my yard the talk of the neighborhood, but also showed her that I wasn't about to let anyone push me around. The fountain was more than just a statement. It was my personal victory over Karen's arrogance. I had taken her petty rules and turned them into something magnificent. If she thought she could control my life, she was in for a big surprise. The following days were a strange kind of peace. The whole neighborhood had caught wind of Karen's latest tirade, but no one seemed to know what to make of my fountain. It wasn't just any fountain, it was a statement. And somehow, the beauty of it seemed to silence even the harshest critics. The sound of the water jets became a constant backdrop to our days. And every time Karen passed by my house, I could feel her tension. As I walked outside one morning to water the plants, I noticed Karen staring at the fountain again. This time, she wasn't fuming or complaining. She was just standing there, her arms folded, her lips pressed tightly together. It was the first time in days she hadn't stormed off in a huff. I walked over, trying to play it cool. "Karen," I said, leaning casually against the fence. "Nice morning, huh?" She didn't respond immediately, her eyes still locked on the fountain, the jets of water rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Finally, she turned to face me, a bitter smile on her lips. "This is an abomination, you know that, right? It's completely out of place in this neighborhood. The HOA will hear about this. I'll make sure of it." I raised an eyebrow. "You've been saying that for days, but I haven't heard anything from the HOA. In fact, I think they're a little too busy admiring my fountain to care about your complaints." Karen's face flushed with anger. "You think this is a game? You can't just flaunt your disregard for the rules like this. You've gone too far, and it's time for you to face the consequences." "Karen," I said calmly, "I followed all the guidelines. This fountain is legal. You can try to twist it however you like, but it's not going anywhere. Maybe the HOA will see it for what it is, a beautiful addition to the neighborhood." Her lips curled in frustration. "You're not going to get away with this. I'll make sure of it." With that, she stormed off again, muttering under her breath. I could practically see the wheels turning in her mind, plotting her next move. But no matter how many times she complained, it wasn't going to change the fact that my fountain was here to stay. A week later, the HOA finally reached out, not to find me, but to inform me that they had received Karen's complaint about the fountain. I wasn't surprised. It was only a matter of time before Karen tried to involve them. The letter they sent, though, was strangely complimentary. They told me that they appreciated the beauty of the fountain and were happy to report that it didn't violate any existing HOA guidelines. Karen was furious when she found out. She stormed into my yard once again, face flushed with indignation. "This isn't over," she spat. "You can't just get away with this. The HOA may have approved it, but I won't let you disrespect our neighborhood like this. You're turning it into a circus." I looked at her, trying not to smile. "Karen, why don't you take a moment and appreciate it? Maybe you'll start to see the beauty in it. The neighborhood could use a little more class. You could use a little more class." She didn't even respond to that. Instead, she turned and walked away, but not before giving the fountain one last disdainful glance. It was clear she couldn't stand that she had lost this battle, and I could tell it was eating at her. As the days passed, the fountain became more than just a symbol of victory. It became a symbol of change in the neighborhood. More people started walking by and stopping to admire it. Some even took photos, while others stood silently, lost in the sound of the water. Slowly but surely, I started to notice a shift. The neighbors, who had once been so cautious of Karen's complaints, now began to speak up. They were tired of her overreach, tired of her constant meddling. One afternoon, a couple from down the street came by to chat while I was watering the plants. "We've been meaning to tell you," the man said, looking over at the fountain. "Your fountain is a breath of fresh air in this neighborhood. We can't believe Karen thought she could tell you to get rid of it. It's beautiful." I smiled. "Thanks. I think it adds something special to the place, don't you?" They nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We were actually considering putting in something similar in our backyard. If you ever need help with anything, don't hesitate to ask." It was moments like these that made it all worth it. The feeling that the tide was turning. No longer was I the outcast in the neighborhood. No longer was I the guy being pushed around by Karen and her ridiculous rules. I was the guy who stood up, who turned the tables, and who refused to be bullied. But Karen wasn't finished yet. A few weeks later, I got a call from one of the neighbors who worked for the HOA. "Hey," he said cautiously, "I don't know if you've heard, but Karen's trying to get a petition going to have your fountain removed. She's telling people it's an eyesore and damages the neighborhood's historical integrity." I couldn't help but chuckle. Historical integrity? The fountain was just a Roman-style piece of art, hardly a disruption to the neighborhood's charm. "I'm not worried about her anymore," I told the neighbor. "Let her complain. She can keep trying to rally support, but I'm not taking this thing down." "Well," he said, sounding relieved, "just wanted to give you a heads up. People are starting to turn on her. They're getting tired of her antics." True to his word, the support for Karen's petition never materialized. As more people saw how ridiculous her complaints were, they stopped siding with her. Even some of the HOA members began to privately express their frustration with her behavior. Karen's influence was fading, and all the while, my fountain stood proudly in the yard, a reminder of how one small act of defiance could change the entire dynamic of a neighborhood. But Karen wasn't one to accept defeat quietly. She kept trying, sabotaging my attempts to host neighborhood barbecues, spreading rumors about the fountain, and making passive-aggressive comments whenever she saw me. But her words no longer had the power to hurt. In fact, they had the opposite effect. Each time she tried to tear me down, I only stood taller. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from the HOA once again, but this time, it wasn't just a notice about the fountain. It was an invitation. They were asking me to host a community event at my house to showcase the fountain and other neighborhood improvements. It was a small victory for everyone who had ever been bullied by Karen, and I couldn't help but smile when I saw that the HOA was on my side. Karen had lost, and now I was the one who had won with style. The event was scheduled for the next weekend, and as the days passed, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and satisfaction. The invitation from the HOA wasn't just a formality. It was a silent victory over Karen and everything she stood for. The fact that the HOA was now looking to me for leadership, to showcase my fountain as a community asset, was everything I had hoped for. It was a win for the neighborhood, for my garden, and most importantly, for the belief that standing up for what's right can lead to real change. By the time the day arrived, my front yard had never looked better. I had spent the past few days making sure every corner of the garden was perfect. The fountain sparkled under the sun, the water jets dancing like they had a life of their own, and the statues stood proudly, almost as if they were waiting for the crowd to gather. I'd even invited a few friends from around the neighborhood to make sure there was a good turnout. And it wasn't just the fountain I was showcasing. I had turned the entire event into an opportunity to bring the community together. There would be a barbecue, music, and games for the kids. The idea was simple: to show that one person's vision could help elevate an entire neighborhood. It wasn't about showing off the fountain, but about the unity that had been formed through this whole ordeal. When the event started, the turnout was incredible. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months showed up, some offering compliments about the fountain, and others asking about the story behind it. As I walked around greeting people, I couldn't help but notice Karen, standing across the street, arms crossed, watching from a distance. She hadn't shown any interest in joining the event, and I could see the bitterness in her eyes as she stared at the crowd. As the day went on, Karen didn't budge. She stayed in her yard, but she couldn't hide from the fact that the community was embracing the very thing she had tried to tear down. The energy in the air was palpable. People were enjoying themselves, not just because of the food or the games, but because they were celebrating something beautiful that had brought them all together. It was about more than just a fountain. It was about creating a space where people could be proud of their neighborhood, where they could feel safe, valued, and heard. That was the kind of community I had always wanted, and I could see that others were finally starting to feel it too. As the evening approached, Karen finally stepped out of her house, no doubt trying to gather some semblance of her usual authority. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the fountain, but I could tell she was torn. She wasn't the loud, judgmental force she once was. No, she was just a bystander now, watching as everyone else seemed to thrive in a space she had tried so hard to control. I couldn't help but smile to myself as I saw people laughing, chatting, and even taking pictures in front of the fountain. It wasn't just a triumph for me. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been unfairly criticized, judged, or belittled. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, I was cleaning up when a neighbor approached me. "You know," he said, "I don't think Karen's going to be coming around for a while." I laughed. "I think you're right. She's definitely overstayed her welcome." He nodded, a serious expression on his face. "You did something important today, you know. You didn't just fight her over a fountain. You made it clear that we don't have to put up with her anymore." I couldn't agree more. Karen had spent so much time trying to control the neighborhood, trying to force everyone to follow her rules. But I had shown that, sometimes, standing up to someone like her doesn't just mean winning a battle. It means changing the whole game. The next few days were filled with new conversations and visits from neighbors who had been too intimidated by Karen before. They came to talk about the event, the fountain, and how they felt that things were finally starting to shift in the neighborhood. It was as if Karen's presence was no longer the dominating force it had been for so long. Her influence had been dismantled, not through confrontation, but through unity, creativity, and the power of community. But Karen didn't take her defeat lying down. She was still trying to fight back in subtle ways. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox, a formal complaint, this time sent directly to the local authorities, claiming that the fountain violated local zoning laws. Of course, I knew this was just another one of Karen's petty attempts to regain control, but I wasn't worried. I had already followed all the rules when I installed the fountain, and the HOA had already confirmed that everything was up to code. Still, I couldn't help but laugh at how far Karen was willing to go. She had lost, and she knew it. No amount of complaints or angry letters would change the fact that the neighborhood had rallied behind me, that the fountain had become a symbol of defiance and change. In the end, the authorities sided with me. There were no zoning violations, no legal reasons to tear down the fountain. And just like that, Karen's last attempt to challenge the fountain fell flat. The battle was over. Karen, as always, had been trying to play by her own rules. But in the end, it was my fountain that stood as a reminder that when you stand up for what's right and fight for something you believe in, you can change the entire landscape of your world. And sometimes, you can even turn a petty HOA complaint into something magnificent.